Dick Allen's here? Maybe Cooperstown doesn't want him, but he can play for us anytime, any place, against anyone. Hey everyone, this is Will O'Toole for Park Ridge Sports History, welcoming you to another edition. This week I'd like to focus on the 1964 season in particular. My cartoon of the week was about the passing of one of my favorite players of all time, certainly of the 60s and 70s, by a guy name of Dick Allen. Started out his career with the Phillies with the name Richie, and then changed it over his career to call me Dick Allen, and he had quite a successful career. And as I would like to note, probably has he's probably really on the cusp of potentially being a Hall of Famer. I know it hasn't happened, but I'd like to talk about that a little bit today and hopefully make my argument for his induction in Cooperstown with a plaque. I know it's a long shot, but nevertheless, just get right into this. And I'll also talk about the 64 season, not from just the National League perspective, but also from the American League as well, because as I went to broadcast today, I found out a story that Phil Linz also passed this week at the age of 81, I believe. And of course, even though Linz was no Hall of Fame ball player on the field to play, he did have a battle with a future Hall of Famer that was provoked by another Hall of Famer, Yankee teammate Mickey Mantle. And I'm talking about the 1964 season when the Yankees, after losing 4 straight to the White Sox late in the summer, in the August heat, sitting in traffic coming from the south side of Chicago, probably either going back to their hotel to catch a flight home, but they had lost 4 straight. Yogi Berra, the manager of that team, was in no mood for any jocularity. And apparently what happened was that Phil Linz played his harmonica. He was one of a few guys that had purchased harmonicas, and I guess just to pass the time, decided he was going to learn to play Mary Had a Little Lamb. Well, it irked Berra because he thought that the players should be in kind of a mood that he was, mad and bitter that they lost and had a losing streak. Anyway, Linz didn't hear Berra say to him to clam up, and in fact turned to Mickey Mantle, who was obviously a bit of a locker room joker, and he asked Mickey Mantle, what did Yogi say? And Mantle said, play it a little bit louder. And of course he does. It infuriates Berra. They have a big to-do in the back, and basically chaos breaks loose. Well, the interesting thing is, in that 64 season, the Yankees do use that moment to kind of turn it around. And I'll focus in on that in a little bit. I'll keep that as a teaser, a cliffhanger for all you Yankee fans out there. But it just goes to show that 64 season, sometimes in the worst, as I guess kind of to paraphrase Dickens, sometimes in the worst of times comes the best of times. And for the Yankees, who are in the middle of another dynasty period in their history, it would turn out to be the best times, or turn into the best times, even though it would lead to the dark winters for the next 12 years for the Bronx Bombers. Anyway, I'll get into that in a little bit because I do have a couple little stats to give you with that. My whole focus today, I guess, was on Dick Allen, and I guess maybe it is really an attack on the new metric, the new stat du jour of baseball number crunchers, baseball statisticians, guys like me who love numbers and love to see what they can do in terms of give value or worth to players. I think it goes beyond reason that we all know the value of guys like Mays and Aaron and Babe Ruth and Barry Bonds, but the numbers that we crunch are to determine the value of guys that are really, really overlooked. And I really believe that Dick Allen in his career was overlooked. Going from, and I'm going to segue from the 64 season. I promise you, Yankee fans, I'm going to get back to that 64 season. But 64 in the NL was quite different because the Phillies were engaged in a pennant race. Gene Mauch had them on all cylinders for April, May, June, July, and for most of August and well into September. The Phillies were about to win their first NL pennant since the Whiz Kids of 1950. And then the wheels fell off the cart. And there were many theories about why that happens, or actually many reasons why that happened. But one that I'm sure many Philly fans probably use as their theories that Gene Mauch was just a cursed manager. You have to recall that Mauch he was under 500 as a manager, yet he kept landing jobs. I think he managed over 20 years in the National and American League. And just give you, and Gene Mauch always seemed to get those teams that were, well, for a lack of better, they were just terrible, or in a terrible, terrible way for a number of years. That's the Phillies of the early 60s. Had some parts like a Jim Bunning, a Chris Short, and soon to be Richie Allen, but they needed other things. Gene Mauch gets them playing well in 64. They, as I stated, Allen was up for a couple of coffees in 62 and 63 just to see what he could do, but then he's brought onto the team in 64, and he leads the league in runs with 125. That's incredible for a guy who's seen as a home run hitter to have that many. Now, he does have Johnny Callison in his finest season in his career. Callison, of course, would go on and probably have the singular moment of his career by hitting a bottom of the ninth 3-run home run in the 64 All-Star game to give the National League a dramatic come-from-behind win over the American League. And, of course, Willie Mays was, as usual, involved in that whole process of the National League comeback in 64. And anyway, that was the first and really the only All-Star game played at Shea Stadium. But anyway, it kept the National League winning. It made Callison probably a household name. He was having a career year with the Phillies. That's why he was on the All-Star team. I think he finished with 32 home runs for the Phillies in 64. So in combination with Allen, with his 20-some odd and 90 RBIs, and Johnny Callison, the Phillies had a nice 3-4, a nice 1-2 punch from both the right and left side of the batter's box. And 64, Phillies, they're taking off. They were selling World Series tickets in the city of brotherly love as late as probably the middle of September. And as I stated, all of the wheels came off. Mauch did not have a legitimate third or fourth starter. So what did he do? He's up by 6 games, 10 games left in the season, basically. He knows that the Cardinals, the franchise, and I am going to make that more. I really think they are more of the dynasty in the NL than any Dodger. Because really, when you think about it, the Dodgers had the late 40s, early 50s all to themselves in Brooklyn. I mean, they were a team. I know that the Giants also shared a number of pennants with them, and so did the Braves in 58 and 50, or 57 and 58. I get all that. But the Dodgers seemed to be, that was really their best moments in Brooklyn. I know that they win the pennant in 41. They hadn't won one since like the 1920s. But really, the Cardinals have been the really the version of the Yankees in the National League. Not as dominant, but certainly they have the most World Series wins outside of the New York Yankees. And they just had the pedigree for winning. And of course, that's what happens in 64. They had a good team, and we've talked about that before. They have 64. They've got Bob Gibson, future Hall of Famer. They have future Hall of Famer Lou Brock on that team. They have a very good player, Curt Flood, who's also involved with Allen a little bit later on in the 60s. They have Bill White playing first. And Ken Boyer, who was the MVP in 64, playing third base. Anyway, they make the late season rush. They overtake the Phillies. The Phillies just collapse. And they wind up losing to the Cardinals in 64. Well, unfortunately, I think Richie Allen kind of got some of the blame for that collapse. Here he is, a rookie, though. 125 runs scored, 91. Couldn't do more for the team. You have a future Hall of Famer on that team, Jim Bunning, who had massively spun a perfect game against the Mets on Father's Day at Shea Stadium. Unbelievable pitcher in the early 60s in Jim Bunning. You have a really good pitcher in Chris Short. Probably never really fulfilled really the potential he had, because after 64, the Phillies are just downright, they just stink. I gotta be very honest with you. They just stink. They have terrible seasons in 65 and 66. And Allen kind of takes quite a bit of the blame. 66, I think he was also hurt. But anyway, they never really recover from the collapse of 64. And Allen does take the brunt of it, more than likely because he is the star. He is kind of an outspoken guy. He does kind of, he's a different kind of locker room athlete than what we thought of in the past. He kind of, has a different beat as a drummer than the rest of his teammates. Anyway, Phillies never really recover. Allen is dealt in 69 after the 69 season, and he goes to the Cardinals. And he's all involved with that Curt Flood. If you recall, the Cardinals trade Flood. It was really a great move by the Cardinals because they were doing the Branch Rickey, and that is getting rid of a player a year too soon rather than a year too late, because they do have Bobby Tolan really in line to take over for Flood. So they say, we're looking at him as past his prime. Let's get some serviceable players for him. And they trade him to the Phillies. Really, it was a dopey trade by the Phillies when you think about it. But anyway, Curt Flood balks at going and leaves baseball. And of course, this is the whole catalyst towards free agency and whatever. Flood never returns to the Cardinals. They eventually deal him to the Washington Senators, and he actually plays for Bob Short, the owner of that team. And I do believe he does play for Ted Williams. And Williams actually really enjoyed Flood, but Flood being out a year, he was never the same player. And I don't think he had the drive to be that great player he was in the early 60s. Remember, he also had other interests. He's a terrific painter. I've seen some of his work. Now, it's not for everybody, but I do like it. I appreciate it. And I guess maybe I'm a little prejudiced when I say it because he's an athlete doing something I like, art. Anyway, Allen, though, is dealt to the Cardinals. And the Phillies, that's not the deal that the Phillies get Carlton. They get some serviceable players. I think they get, yes, they do. They get Tim McCarver on the deal. So that wasn't too bad, and I'll explain that in a little bit. McCarver goes to the Phillies and a couple other players here and there. Allen does go to the Cardinals, and he actually makes the All-Star team as the starting first baseman. If you recall, he comes up and plays third base for the Phillies, and like a couple of contemporaries of him, and I'll get into this, Orlando Cepeda and also Tony Perez, they just don't have the acumen. They just don't have the ability to play third base. Difficult spot. And both players, just like Allen, are moved to the other side of the diamond and play first base and handle it quite well. Allen goes to the Cardinals. He is the starting first baseman in the All-Star game in 1970. Why I make such a big deal of that was that was the first year that the vote was returned to the fans. And Allen hits over 30 home runs for the Cardinals that year, but he also starts the All-Star game. Interestingly enough, I believe that Allen is also, and this also lends kind of credits to my Hall of Fame thing, he's the first Cardinal, I believe, that have 30 home runs with the team playing the majority of their games in Busch Stadium. So he's the first one that ever hit 30 home runs after the Cardinals move into Busch. He doesn't stay there long, and I think the reason why the Cardinals move him is that they're looking down the line and they say, we have Joe Torre, we're probably going to have to eventually move him. It doesn't work out. And in fact, I will tell you this, Richie Allen only, I think, played 125 or 130 games for the Cardinals that year. He was hurt again. And of course, it's going to come back. But I believe he only played like 125, 130 games for the Cardinals in 1970. He still had 34 home runs. He gets dealt to the LA Dodgers. He helps the Dodgers come within one game of beating the Giants for the NL West divisional title. They finished with 89 wins, and of course the Giants finished with 90. It's really Willie Mays' and Willie McCovey's and Juan Marichal's swan song in San Francisco. Of course, they get beat by the Bucks. And then over the winter of 71, Dick Allen is traded to the White Sox. And the reason why I bring this up is that he had two really good seasons. He was coming off some really good seasons with the Phillies, as I stated. I think in 66, he gets hurt. In 70, he doesn't play a full complimentary 160 games for the Cardinals and still drives in 30 or hits 34 home runs. He goes to the Dodgers. Probably wasn't a fit. I don't know. The interesting thing about that Cardinal or that Dodger team, they do go out and they get Frank Robinson for the 72 season. They had a home run hitter there. Imagine if they had Robinson and Allen on the same team. They might have been able to win the title in 72 against the Reds. Who knows? Allen goes to the White Sox, who had just had their first winning season in a while in 1971. They were 83 and 79, but finished a ton of games behind the Oakland A's, who were just starting their dynasty out west. Remember, they would win 5 West titles, they would win 3 pennants, and they would win, more importantly, 3 World Series. 2 against, all 3 teams. One, of course, would be seen as a dynasty, the Reds. The Dodgers would come back after 74, after they lost to the A's, and come back for 3 more World Series. And, of course, the Mets were coming back off 69, and they returned again in 73. And as I've stated in previous episodes, the Mets weren't all that bad in 73. If you took 1972 Mets, before they had all the injuries with Yogi Berra, and then you attached it to the second half of the 73 season, the Mets win about 87, 88 games with those 2 parts being put as one. Nevertheless, Allen goes to the White Sox, and he really resuscitates the South Side, really brings fans back into Comiskey Park, because let's face it, Chicago is a National League town. The Cubs are the love. They have the love fest between the fans. There aren't too many celebrities rooting for the White Sox, unless you include, except of course, the former president, Barack Obama. But most of the celebrities root for the Chicago Cubs, the Bill Murrays, etc. But the White Sox now, with Dick Allen playing first base, 1972, all right, has 37 homers, drives in 160 16 runs, I believe, and hits 315 or 316, wins the MVP. So now he wins the Rookie of the Year, MVP. Everybody's waiting for the White Sox. Of course, they lose to the A's, who lose to the Orioles 3 straight in the 71 division playoffs. So everybody in Comiskey Park, everybody on the south side thinks that the Chi Sox are really going to have a real go at the, oh no, excuse me, that's 71. 72, of course, Oakland wins the whole thing. In 73, though, they think that the White Sox are all set to go. In 72, Bill Melton, who had led the league in home runs in 71 with 33, had back problems. They thought he was going to come back in 73. And with Melton and Allen, maybe 60, 70 home runs between the two of them. Wilbur Wood, an unbelievable knuckleball pitcher, would win as many as he would lose, but at least he was good for almost 50 games. They do have a Goose Gossage, future Hall of Famer, on that team. And Chuck Tanner, who is their manager, brilliantly moves him from the starting rotation and moves him back into the relief spot where he goes on for Hall of Fame glory. Anyway, 73 starts out really well. The White Sox are in contention. And about, I would say about June, if I can remember. And of course, this is the Sports Illustrated Hex, because 72, of course, I've shown that cover of Dick Allen with a smoke, and he's juggling some baseballs and stuff. He made the cover, but Allen gets hurt. And it's a bad leg injury. And if I recall, I think he might have busted the leg. And he's basically out for the rest of the year. At that point, Allen has 16 homers and about 40 some odd RBIs. Basically the same exact numbers as he did in 1972 for the White Sox. The White Sox finished the season in 73. They're not blown out, but they really never make a run at the Oakland A's. In 74, he comes back. But Allen is really never the same player. And by 75, he's with Oakland. And then he goes to the Phillies, I believe, late 75 and into 76. And he does his full cycle with the Phillies. He does wind up playing in a couple of playoff games with the Phillies. But, of course, they weren't ready to take the mantle. And, of course, the Reds were at their prime, winning the World Series both years back-to-back, and, of course, sweeping the Phillies 6 straight in those 2 championship seasons. But Dick Allen, this is actually his 75 card or 76 card. Oh, excuse me, with the White Sox. This is 74. This is he on the baseball card. I actually like those White Sox uniforms, the red. I love the pinstripes. And, of course, I've mimicked his butterfly stance. I've said that really Gary Sheffield, another guy I think should be in the Hall of Fame. And the reason being is that I've even mentioned this. Sheffield is Allen times 2. If you take Allen's stats and double them, you have Gary Sheffield's stats. And there's no reason why Gary Sheffield shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. That's an utter mistake. It's a travesty in terms of baseball. There's no real travesty in the world of sports. But that is a travesty in baseball, that a guy with over 500 home runs, played on a World Series team, just like Allen, was a journeyman, not a journeyman, but oft traded, played for the Marlins, played for the Mets, played for the Dodgers, a number of teams, even I think revisited some teams twice, but just a great player. And just like Allen, the same kind of player, third baseman, first baseman, a little better fielder, etc. He should definitely be in the Hall of Fame. Now, my case for Allen being in the Hall of Fame, well, here's the deal. There are about 4 or 5 contemporaries of Allen, guys who played in the 60s and in the 70s. And I'm just going to list them. Hal Baines, Tony Perez, Orlando Cepeda, Jim Rice, and Willie Stargell. And guess what? All five have this in common. They're all in the Hall of Fame. 4 of the 5 were first basemen. 3 of the 5 were third basemen converted to first base. 3 of the 5, or actually, 3 of the 5 MVPs. 1 a Rookie of the Year. All in the Hall of Fame. And guess what they also all have in common? All of them have a lower WAR than Richie Dick Allen. All of them. The one who's closest is Willie Stargell, 57.5. The reason I bring up Stargell is this. Stargell had over 500 home runs. He's an MVP once. He wins 2 World Series, both dramatic 7-game affairs with the Baltimore Orioles. In both those games, interestingly enough, Game 7s, both played in Baltimore, both in Memorial Stadium. Both have a Hall of Fame player hit home runs to either give a lead to the Pirates or keep the lead and help eventually win the game. One, of course, is Roberto Clemente, and the other, of course, is Willie Stargell. Stargell had a tremendous 79 World Series. Okay one. I shouldn't even say okay. I think he hit 208 in 71. It was Clemente's brilliance that really helped them, plus great pitching by the Pirates staff. They just overwhelmed the Baltimore hitters in that 71 series. Anyway, Stargell. Oh, here's the other thing. As I go, here's the other thing. Every one of them have the same amount of all-star appearances as Richie Allen. It's amazing. And Allen, of the 5, I do believe this. He's the only one to start all-star games in both leagues in consecutive seasons. No, excuse me, not in consecutive seasons, 70 and 72. Kind of interesting. But Allen has a higher WAR, 58.8, than Willie Stargell, 57.5, then Jim Rice, 49.7, then Tony Perez, 54, then Hal Baines, 38.7, and Orlando Cepeda has a 50.1. And the interesting thing is with Cepeda, he does get dealt to the same team that Richie Allen did. 1967, though, he goes and plays for the Cardinals, and of course they win a World Series. They beat the Red Sox dramatically in 7 games, and he fashioned himself probably his greatest season because he wins the MVP, Orlando Cepeda. I think he had 125 RBIs and 25 home runs. But again, he's playing in Busch, and who had more home runs? The first guy to reach 30 for the Cardinals while they were playing in Busch? Dick Allen. And of course, interestingly enough, Cepeda, not the greatest of fielders, kind of like Allen, does end his career as the first DH for the Red Sox. Interestingly enough, I think 72. He had 20 home runs for the Red Sox in his swan song. Now, all of the players, with the exception of, I believe, Hal Baines, hit more home runs than Allen. But I can kind of defend this and say, had he not gotten hurt, 73 wiped out that season. And as I said, he was having the same numbers, projected to have the same numbers. And he was never the same player, 74, 75. What hurts Allen is the journeyman status, that he's oft traded. So right away people think, is he a locker room lawyer? Number 2, what really, really probably does hurt him is the fact that the teams he played for never got a sniff of the playoffs or even postseason or the World Series. And of course, yes, you can argue, well, he did play for the Phillies, but he was a role player, a bench player on those Philly teams of 75, 76, and he was past his prime. And really, those were the waning days. He never recovered from the injury. But Dick Allen was a monster player for the 4, 5, I'd even say 6 years. He was just one of those great hitters. During the 60s, you would say Mays and Aaron. You'd have to put Allen in the discussion in the National League. Cepeda, yes. and a few, maybe a Ron Santo, a Billy Williams. But Allen is right there in the 60s. Allen is a monster hitter, known for tape measure shots. Who can forget the 67 All-Star game in Anaheim where he hits a bomb to center? I mean, it's a bomb. Take a look at YouTube and you can see that. But Allen is, I guess, sometimes overlooked. He's probably one of those, as I stated, a cusp player. I wish somewhere in the future people would look on him and say, wow, you know, he's not, you take a look at the body of his career, he's not a bad player. Interestingly enough, the WAR, I am not the biggest fan of the WAR. I just think it's another tool to use to measure players, etc. It's not the be-all and end-all, and I think I've kind of shown how it isn't. And in fact, there is a guy who I failed to mention when I was going over this, that Willie Davis, who I had pointed out back when I was doing something on the 71 All-Star game, Willie Davis actually has a higher WAR than all of these players. And I don't know whether in the discussion of real GMs, good Gold Glove player, I know he led the league in triples a couple of times, was a very good center fielder. He's probably most remembered for making 3 errors in the 66 World Series, all in the same inning. Kind of unfair, but he had great speed. He kind of embodied those 60 Dodger teams, probably more of a line drive, opposite field type of hitter. And those Dodger teams were built more on pitching and kind of winning 3-2 games with a little bit of magic and bunting and stealing and all the rest of it. But Willie Davis actually has a higher WAR than the 5 I listed plus Allen. So take that for as it may. I'm using the argument that if those guys, and we all recognize they're all Hall of Fame players, and they deservedly should be in Cooperstown, why not Dick Allen? And of course, I'm going to hear people then, why not Willie Davis? I think most fans know this. We know in Cooperstown, there are just certain players that are just upper echelon players. Mays, Ruth, Aaron, Bench, Berra, Mantle, Musial, Ted Williams. Then there are like the second tier player. And I may get people angry when I say this. I'm thinking guys like McCovey, and I'm just using hitters right now. Guys like McCovey and Brock. Maybe even Brock is like a third tier player. But we know who the best of the best. And then we know guys who are on the second tier and third tier, all deserving to be in Cooperstown because of their contributions to the game. But I think there is room for a guy like Dick Allen. All right, let's turn to another guy and the 64 season. My last few minutes on this. And as I was saying, it was 64. Ready for this? Outside, forget Dick Allen over here, but these are the 3 main players in 64. Of course, Mickey Mantle. Of course, Yogi Berra, 2 Hall of Famers, 2 all-time greats. They're upper echelon Hall of Famers. And then we have Phil Linz, known more for the harmonica, although he had a pretty good career in the business world after his baseball. Actually, the funny thing is, with that 64 season, as I set the scenario, they're on a bus. They just lost 4 straight to the White Sox. Nobody's in a very good mood if you're a Yankee fan. I think that Phil Linz was probably probably saw baseball as a different way than Mantle and Berra. He, and if you ever read this Ball 4, one of my favorite books of all time, still has one of the best endings. I put it right up there with the ending of Huck Finn, if you've ever read Huckleberry Finn. But in Jim Bouton, he says, you spend your whole life gripping a baseball, and in the end, you realize it's the other way around. I think that's the exact quote. And I think for many kids who grew up in the 60s and 70s playing forever in the sandlots or at the school, with a tennis ball or a rubber ball or a wiffle ball or baseballs on the fields. That baseball had that grip on us. And it just wasn't about collecting cards for the sake of collecting cards. And it just wasn't reading box scores for the sake of reading box scores or listening to the game on the radio. There was something more. It was almost genetically encoded in us. And I think for many fans of the Yankees, kids growing up in this area, it was like that. In '64, the Yankees were really on the verge. They were. It was their last best chance for winning a World Series. Everyone was getting old. Mantle, of course, was already broken down. Berra had assumed command. Actually, I think Berra is an overlooked manager. He really is a good manager. Anyway, '64, they're on the bus. They lose 4 straight to the White Sox. They're in a pennant race with the White Sox. And I believe Baltimore is also involved. They're just coming into their own. Minnesota was having a bad year. The Red Sox were way down on the bottom. But it was really between the White Sox, the Yankees, Baltimore, I'm going to say. And they lose 4 straight to the White Sox. Of course, the White Sox had guys like Gary Peters, Tommy John. Really good pitching, Joel Horland. Really good pitching. No hitting. Imagine if Allen was on the White Sox in '64 as the rookie. He would have been Rookie of the Year and MVP. Think about that. But anyway, in '64, of course, the MVP in the American League was Brooks Robinson, one of the few times where third baseman. I think it happened another time with Brett and Mike Schmidt. Again, I apologize. I'm going off on tangents. These are things that just come to your mind when you're thinking about this. We're in a bar having a hamburger. These are things that come to light. Linz plays the harmonica. Berra goes crazy. There's after Mantle, and then Berra says, "Knock it off." Mantle tells Linz, who asked him, "What did Yogi say?" And Mantle, being the real prankster, says, "Play a little louder," and he does. Berra goes ballistic. 4 games, you're hot, you're sticky, you're smelly, you've just lost 4 games, you're all grimy, you're stuck in traffic in downtown Chicago. You just want to get back to the hotel room, shower, get out of there. And there's a big brouhaha in the back. And apparently the harmonica is flipped. It hits Joe Pepitone. He goes off in conniption saying he's hurt. It actually breaks any kind of tension after the 4 losses. And they attribute them winning, the Yankees, many of the Yankees players do, to this harmonica incident. The funny thing is, though, everybody thinks they've won the next game. They actually, I believe they lost 2 of 3 the next time out. And I think they lose to the Red Sox. Here's the deal, though. The Yankees were, I believe, 69-50 at that point, a full 5 games behind the White Sox. They finished the season 99-63. So from that point, they go 30 wins, and they only lose 13 times. Whitey Ford wins his last 5 starts, or he goes 5-0. He finishes, I think, 12-5 or 12-7. Amazing finish. And of course, they go on and they lose to Bob Gibson in the '64 World Series. And I say Bob Gibson because he won 3 games. The ultimate warrior. And he is able to piece together a complete game 7-5 win. Phil Linz, ironically, never known for being a home run hitter, hits 2 home runs, both off Gibson in that World Series, and one in the last inning and then, of course, Gibson puts down the Yankees and gets the final out to seal the deal for the Cardinals and win. But 1964, 2 teams, a few games out, they rally, overtake. Actually, the Yankees overtook the White Sox in '64. They were in first place by a full 5 games. I think this is August 11th. And they just play lights out. and they beat the White Sox by 1 game. Actually, they did ice the game in game like 161, and then they lose the last game of the year, so it looks closer. But they actually beat the White Sox, clinch the pennant, go on and lose Game 7 of the World Series to the St. Louis Cardinals, who they themselves rally and defeat the Philadelphia Phillies of 1964 and Dick Allen's team. I want to thank you guys again for listening. Shout out to Howard Fredericks, who always keeps me organized and edits this so brilliantly as best he can. But as we go, Hall of Famer, harmonica player, cusp Hall of Famer. This is Will O'Toole celebrating 1964 on the Yankee side and the Cardinal side, and celebrating the great career of Richard Dick Allen. See you next week.